The COVID crisis has affected everyone. A silent fallout of the pandemic has been a growing mental health crisis.
Whenever we were ill earlier, either in our body or in our mind, we used to have the support of people around us. People would come and help us out and things like that. Unfortunately for us, this new virus which has come in the past 2 years has removed the social support from quite a huge amount of population. We have to stay isolated, we have to be stuck in our houses, and those who also want to help cannot go and give their help in places of need.
A lot of people need support. A lot of people need a voice that cares.
So the Voice That Cares helpline really is an emotional first aid which we are going to give to the people.
The Voice That Cares initiative originated on a suggestion by the National Disaster Management Authority for NGOs to step in and provide psychosocial first aid to support large sections of the population affected by the pandemic.
While the premise, behind the helpline seems very simple, but the reality is that the issues associated with the implementation and the management of such a helpline could be little complex.
The main base for this platform, Voice That Cares, is the resource bank.
Keeping the backups for the volunteers to ensure the smooth running of the helpline is very important at all the times.
The Voice That Cares helpline team has been trained by NIMHANS, Center for Psychosocial Support in Disaster Management.
We did many tasks for the first time ever. Everything we did was like, I don't know. We started with, I don't know, sir. And then we started saying, okay, I know something. And that's how we began the journey.
The Voice That Cares helpline is offered to the public free of charge in English and in Hindi.
The team members are qualified counselors with their qualification of PG diploma in counselling or MSc in clinical psychology, and some of them are from a master's in social work.
The Voice That Cares number is 8448 844845. It runs from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. The Voice That Cares initiative is jointly offered by the Ripples of Change Foundation and Heartfulness Institute. Joining us for the launch event of Voice That Cares is Daaji, the heartfulness guide and spiritual mentor to millions around the world. The guests of honor for this event are Dr. V. Thiruppugazh, Additional Secretary, Policy and Planning in the National Disaster Management Authority, New Delhi, and Dr. Sekar Kasi, Professor and Head, Registrar, Center for Psychosocial Support in Disaster Management at NIMHANS, Bengaluru, Karnataka.
A very warm welcome to viewers from all across the globe. Dear Daaji, Dr. Thiruppugazh and Dr. Sekar Kasi, thank you very much for joining us today for the launch of the Voice That Cares Psychosocial First Aid Counseling Helpline. This is a unique offering that aims to provide psychosocial counseling during these pandemic times in a humane and supportive environment. With this context, the background, I would like to request Daaji to officially unveil the launch of the Voice That Cares Psychosocial First Aid Counseling Helpline. Daaji, we would also like to hear your perspective on this initiative and your vision for the same.
My respectful pronouns to Dr. V. Thiruppugazh, Dr. Sekar Kasi. I've been wondering, I've been a pharmacist for so many years and practicing in New York City, and then I started practicing in the smaller suburbs of New Jersey. Over the years, the trend of prescriptions kept changing. Earlier in the 80s, when I used to process prescription, they were mainly related to, this cough and cold and bronchitis and asthma and blood pressure. And, very rarely you would see prescription associated with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, ADHD, and you name it. Names that you have never heard in your pharmacy school, you had to start learning again during your professional career, because those diseases at a mental level were kind of non-existent. Now, when you move away from a highly populous New York City and start practicing this in suburban neighborhoods means wealthy neighborhoods, where I would fill prescription in New York City, there are hardly 10% prescriptions related to mental diseases. While in the New Jersey suburb, I used to fill 90% prescriptions associated with mental diseases. And I am telling you, this is my personal observation. See? And that goes back until 2004 or 2005, until I practiced as a pharmacist. Now the situation is even dire, quite serious. And they say, it doesn't matter which neighborhood you are in now. Mental disease has taken all arenas of social structure, be they poor, be they middle class, be they upper middle class, or be they wealthy. Of course, in upper middle and in wealthier classes, they no longer process, perhaps when it comes to drug addiction. They bypass legal systems and end up using all those hard drugs. And that also shows how it is masking everything, masking in the sense that mental health. The age group between 18 and 24 is of biggest concern today, because the suicidal rate and almost 45% of these children, the youth, is suffering from depression and anxiety. ADHD also has skyrocketed for multiple reasons. Here in India, the situation is not all that bad. Yet, of course, because of the stigma associated with it, nobody comes forward and say, I have these issues. See, that is the main problem, stigma. What will people think if I say my child is not behaving right? And in fact, when child is naughty and not listening and suffering with this attention deficit disorder, we try and say, oh, he's like Lord Krishna, and he's such a gullible little naughty boy. We associate all this with our deities and gods and goddesses, and we get away with it until it hits you hard when they grow up. So earlier the diagnoses are made, better it is. And especially now, I tell you a hilarious situation. One of our neighbors here in Madhuvanam, we requested her to go for a shot, this Covaxin vaccination. Moment she heard that this was her turn today, she started sweating, perspiring profusely. Her heart rate went up, her face kind of flushed. And by the time she went to the clinic, which is in our ashram, she refused to take a shot. So we managed and let her sit there and observe other patients taking shots and see nothing was happening to them. See? So even the very cure or the preventive measure that we are taking can also create a kind of frustration. So there is so much of ignorance at a social level as far as medicine is concerned. See? I'm reminded of Dr. Barry Warrington from US, who was practicing in one of those islands in Japan. And he invented a very significant system of sharing medicine to at least pediatricians. Pediatrician, ever since, no longer remained the same, because he would tell the mothers that you bring your child to my clinic. The first visit, we will not even touch your child. He should come like, as if he's going to a nursery or a kindergarten. And in the first visit, doctor would offer a lollipop or something, and he would just dress in a white coat. He will not be even having a stethoscope around him at that time. So child is familiarized, you see. The second visit, mother would be sitting with the child and doctor would be in another chair with a stethoscope. And he would invite the child and take the toy. Doctor will not get up and go give it to a child, but he will entice the child to get up himself or herself and take the toy. That was the only condition. Third trip, doctor would take a stethoscope and measure mother's, the breathing, etc., and heart rate. And slowly he would move that stethoscope in the third visit to the child. And this is how the friendship or a relationship or a bond is created between a patient and a doctor. How are we in our society going to make a friendlier association between healthcare givers and people who are needy as far as health is concerned? So the role of our foundation, role of our services rather, goes far, far away. To move away the ignorance associated with all this paranoia, I think this is my only submission. Thank you. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Daaji. Thank you so much for your guidance. I would now like to invite Dr. Thiruppugazh. Dr. Thiruppugazh, thank you so much for gracing us. We would love if you could share your message on this August occasion and also your thoughts on the impact of COVID pandemic towards the country's health infrastructure and how NDMA is really looking at NGOs to play an active role towards mitigation of this crisis. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Namaste, Daaji. This pandemic, COVID-19, is the biggest disaster we have faced in post-independent India. Not only in terms of loss of lives, but also in terms of economic loss. In all other disasters, such as earthquakes, landslides, tsunamis, or floods, the death and devastation is very much visible in terms of collapsed buildings, submerged built environment, or caved-in slopes, or damages to other assets. But here in COVID-19, the damage is not visible, but this is a silent killer. COVID-19 is not only the biggest disaster in terms of economic loss, but also the biggest disaster we have seen in terms of mental stress and psychological trauma. Those who are infected, they suffer in isolation wards, in COVID hospitals, ICUs, or in COVID care centers or at home. Their loved ones have no access to them. They feel stressed as they are not able to help. They feel stressed as they are not there near them to console them. In many cases, they have not been able to have a last glimpse of the faces of their loved ones also. Those who have recovered also continue to suffer from psychological trauma. The very process of treatment in terms of isolation and quarantine creates trauma. Added to this is the grief, anger, fear, helplessness, and guilt. This makes people more vulnerable to COVID-19. Thousands of children have been orphaned. Many more children have been left with single parents. The need for mental healing is much more than the need for physical healing now. I have been in this field of disaster management for nearly 30 years. I've been working with Dr. Sekar for nearly 20 years. We have handled many, many disasters together, starting with Bhuj earthquake. Normally, in major disasters, a global estimate says 15% of the affected people suffer from psychological trauma. After Gujarat earthquake, we did a survey and we found that only 3% suffered from psychological trauma. Gujarat is still Kachru Kamar. So they are capable people. Only 3% of the people needed referral services. Whereas in this COVID-19, I think Dr. Sekar will be able to tell us exactly what is the percentage. Nearly 40 to 50% of the people must have been affected by psychological stress in varying degrees, mild to very severe. NDMA has been interacting with NGOs and working with the NGOs basically for 3 reasons. One is to seek their help for physical infrastructure like hospitals, treatment centers, COVID care centers. And second is logistics like ambulances, oxygen and other services. Third is for psychosocial counseling. After we had a couple of meetings with the NGOs, I suddenly remembered Shri Ramachandra Mission and Heartfulness Institute. Helping in the crisis is true spirituality. I have heard one Zen monk collected money for publishing the Sutras of Patriarchs. 10 years he collected money and he was about to publish it. There was a great famine and he spent all the money in famine relief. Then he spent another 10 years collecting money, and when he was about to publish, there was a severe flood and he spent all the money in flood relief. And he collected money for 10 more years and he finally published the book. In the publication ceremony, he said, I have published the sutras thrice. First when there was famine, second when there was flood, and this is the 3rd edition, and the first 2 editions are better than the 3rd. So that is how I look at spirituality. Hence I requested Mr. Srinivasan and Sharawat Saab, whom I used to meet in RK Center, why don't our mission take up this issue? And they willingly agreed. They were willing to explore the possibilities. The response was really overwhelming. First, starting with the 50-bedded hospital in Chennai, following it up with 200-bed hospital in Thiruppugazh, now opening this psychosocial counseling program for about nearly 1 lakh man-hours. This is a huge, huge contribution for COVID management in India. I do not know how to thank Daaji and all the members, Mr. Mahesh, Mr. Srinivasan. I really do not know how to thank you all. This psychosocial trauma, this mental stress is going to continue for a long, long time. The 3rd wave is yet to come. We do not know how many more waves are awaiting us. The psychological stress due to economic loss will be there for a much, much longer time. Even after COVID has disappeared totally on this from this earth, even if it becomes an endemic restricted to a small population, this psychological stress will continue due to loss of livelihoods, fear, guilt, loneliness, all are going to continue. So this is not a 2020 match. This is going to be a test match. We should be ready to play a long innings. That is my request and caution. While I thank Daaji, Heartfulness Foundation, Ripples Foundation, my special thanks also goes to Dr. Sekar. As I said earlier, we have been together in several disasters addressing this issue of psychosocial counseling. When I requested him that now Heartfulness Foundation is willing to help us. You should train their volunteers, you should train the people. He readily agreed. Not only that, he readily agreed for training all the volunteers, but also Nimans has agreed to waive off the training charges and training fees. So my special thanks to Dr. Sekar and Nimans for this. I wish this effort, this selfless effort, a very big success. One day in future, when we do the documentation of COVID-19, its impact and its recovery, the help rendered by you people will prominently figure in that document. The work will stand there and speak to the future generations for many, many decades. So once again, I thank all of you. I'm a Gujarat cadre officer. I spent nearly 25 years in Gujarat. I missed Daaji. Now I am meeting him online. I'm very grateful to him. Thanks. I thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thiruppugazh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thiruppugazh. Daaji, when the idea of psychosocial counseling took over, came forward, the next challenge before us was to understand how do we acquire those skills. And this was something new for us at that point in time. And as Dr. Thiruppugazh said, he introduced Dr. Kashi to us. And Nagesh and his team had a discussion with Dr. Kasi, and Dr. Kasi was immediately willing to deploy the talent of Nimhans to give an orientation to our training team. So Dr. Kashi, thanks so much for your responsiveness and for the proactive way with which you have supported us. I request Dr. Kashi now to please share his thoughts on how the pandemic has had specifically an impact on mental health and how psychosocial support and first aid can address and mitigate these issues, the severity especially, and what role Nimhans is playing in this regard and his words of support for this initiative. So Dr. Kashi, over to you, please.
Namaste, Daaji.
Namaskaram, sir.
Sir, for the long association we have had, and today when NDMA has recognized that psychosocial support and mental health services as one of the major guidelines among all the things, it's seeing a much light today. Now, COVID pandemic, despite various advances, what Daaji was also talking about, has caused more than 1 million deaths throughout the world. That's a much larger number. Aside from the death toll, we also have triggered a significant emotional, physical, as well as economic problems, not only in India, but around the world. And that is where the psychosocial plays a very, very vital part when we talk about it. When lockdown occurred, people were asking, how do I travel from Kundakal to Guwahati? When the train services will start? But today, the trigger is much more in terms of, I would say, a psychological pandemic in terms of the anxieties, the depressions, and other things. To an extent, we in mental health field are looking for new diagnostic criteria, including COVID anxiety, COVID depression, COVID PTSD, and things like that. Why so? Because in our lifetime, we have only 10 events to occur. But COVID pandemic is creating those 10 events in our life within 1 year. And that causes a larger amount of a stress for us. But whether India can handle it by mental health professionals alone, I'm very sorry. We have very, very less number of mental health professionals in this country. For every 2 lakh population, there is one psychiatrist, and he cannot practice what Daaji was talking about, even how a pediatrician back in Japan was making a thing after 3rd session. Even to have a 3 minutes of a mental health professional might be very difficult for this 1.3 billion population. In that, when a pandemic is creating not only mental, other healthcare issues, the mental health care issues are much, much larger. of the new types of the mental health problems what we are seeing in the community. And that is because of the various life events what they are undergoing. And in this sort of a life event, what we need to talk about is overall psychosocial support, but that takes a very long time. At this surge, because of large amount of infrastructure problems and other things, we thought we will initiate the psychosocial first aid at the first level. And psychosocial first aid, what we are looking for is that the Voice That Cares initiative, which originated with the NDMA, as well as the Ripples of Change Foundation and Heartful Foundation, the way they have come forward to carry out this together of creating the voice to care along with the psychological and other things, psychosocial counseling is a very, very great effort, which I place it on record. And NIMANS has played one small role in it. I don't think it's as much as great what you're talking about. We did a psychosocial first aid training for the first level 70 master trainers. Whereas according to me, we need thousands and thousands of such master trainers in the country today to spread the news, message, to be actively looking at a volunteer willing to give his lending ear to hear of the emotions which are coming from the people, of what people want to ventilate. At the outset, they don't talk about it. But once when I start opening the pressure cooker, I see the buzz coming out in large number. I've been attending to some of the personal calls when my boys come back and say, sir, it's a small, difficult case. But when I go into the depth of it, I want to give you one small story. They said, this old man is very disturbing for us, always calling back. And I said, give the phone, let me talk to him. When I picked up the phone, the issues came out was that I live in an apartment. My son has given this and he is working in US and my daughter is in Europe and they gave me all the facility. But the problem is that all these persons during the lockout are roaming around and other things. What can I do? How can I bring in some amount of it? I was going on. At the end of the day, I found two reasons. My wife is a cancer patient and I have a mentally retarded child in my home. If something happens to me, who will take care of those two? There lies the psychological issue and the social behavior of the community, what they have not been following. I had to contact at the level of Additional Director General of Police to help this old man out, to bring in what a residential campus need to do about and how to go about looking at the others' issue. As you rightly said, there are persons who think that they are all totally immune to it, but it is not their immunity. They are checking on the immunity of the other people. So at this point of a time, if we have this 6-hour training, what we have given to our Ripples of Change master trainers, if they are able to multiply and if they are going to get it through the volunteer effort of providing this help to others, the volunteer-driven approach will definitely reduce the large number of suffering what the people will be doing it. I don't want any other sort of a thing. At the end of the day, if I've been able to listen to 1 million people, that itself is a major cause of action what I have done. And the basics of psychosocial support is much larger. We'll be going on with that sometime later. But in PSFA, we have want the heartful communication for deep listening and responding with empathy. These are the 3 things what I'm looking currently at this PSFA. Nothing more than that. And if there are 1 million persons who are going to listen to the 1 billion persons, that would bring in a large amount of a change. And that change is nothing but a behavior change modification, what I expect in others, not to infect the rest and me not infecting others. That is a larger sort of a thing what I look at. And in this, whatever the small little work we had been able to, we will definitely continue to handle, and we will definitely go about it. And this is a pandemic which has created and affected more than 75 to 85% compared to the rest of the disasters which have occurred. And in everybody's mind, there is something or other. Only when you dust it and listen with empathy, you will be able to look at that. And in particular, depression is much higher. And I don't want yet another suicide or alcohol behavior to take on as a coping mechanism. If they are able to get from spirit to spirituality, that would be the largest contribution we are going to do for this community. And I look forward for seeing the outcomes of this in terms of the first line, psychological first aid, whatever volunteers are going to give. And it is not an end in itself. They are going to develop a relationship with the public, and that public thing will provide a large amount of reduction in the distress what the people are having. And last but not the least, it's a very humane approach and practical assistance and very non-intrusive and practical care and support what our volunteers are going to give. Let us be supportive to them to whatever extent we could. Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sekar. It was really inspiring and heartwarming to hear your guidance. Revered Daaji, I think with this, we sort of, we're very grateful for the inputs of both Thiruppugazh sir and Dr. Sekar. We would request you, if you would like to share your closing remarks for today's launch.
After listening to both Dr. Prabhu and Dr. Sekar, I have a better understanding now of what we are trying to achieve. Hitherto, I only understood how to extend our help, but now I understood more specifically what is really needed of us. Of course, facilities are there, but to go forward further in bringing this awareness and giving them, granting people some level of calmness, some level of poise, some level of assurance. I think we'll have to deploy all our volunteers. So we have volunteers base of almost close to 50,000 people. On moment's notice, they can be activated. Keeping one phone number for each state, toll-free number, or depending upon how we advance, let's begin with one toll-free number at the national level. And as we progress and more demand comes up our way, then we can segregate it in zone-wise and separate these numbers and direct them to operators in respective states speaking specific language, and then divert them to others, as Dr. Kasi said, empathetic listening, heartful communication, and a loving heart. See, when they come together, I think already the disease will, the anxiety related to disease will subside just by having this first aid. First aid is listening to them. See, just as I was citing an example of a sister who was kind of hysterical just before taking the shot. Some yogic techniques are there. We made her breathe a little bit with the left nostril. Left nostril breathing is very good in reducing stress. So this simple method of 2 minutes of left nostril breathing can alleviate many problems that can otherwise become chronic. Anyways, I'm very grateful to these two great guys from our India and how they're trying to make a difference. Also, the participation of Ripples of Change and Voice That Counts and Heartfulness Institution. I think it will be a great marriage of so many people coming together. I don't have much more to share except this simple thought that how we can take this forward.
Thank you, Daaji.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time and for your guidance. And with this, we come to a formal conclusion of this launch event. Dr. Shekhar Kasi and Dr. Thiruppugazh, once again, our gratitude for all the support you have been giving us. And I'm sure we will all have a lot of opportunity to work together in this journey. Just before we conclude the call, Daaji, with your permission, I would just like Nagesh to introduce the team which has been working tirelessly on developing this particular platform and organizing the training with NIMHANS and from ROCF and some of the Heartfulness volunteers. So Nagesh bhai, would you just like to introduce the team?
Yeah, thank you, Shri. Can I request the ROCF team to all sort of switch on your cameras so that Daaji can have a view? The entire team that's worked on this initiative has worked.
I think I'm familiar with most of them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So thank
you
for
Daaji.
your time. Thank you, Dr. Kasi, Dr. Thiruppugazh.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling Voice That Cares Helpline that promotes psychological and social well-being. Namaskar. Voice That Cares Helpline पर कॉल करने के लिए धन्यवाद. ये हेल्पलाइन मनोसामाजिक कल्याण को बढ़ावा देती है.
I am a psychiatrist, so I know that voices can be comforting and voices are comforting.